I was not at fault here. I don't understand why the universe has decided that I should suffer. As I lay here and listen to his throaty, phlegm-filled breathing, I consider again the idea that ending it might be best. It wasn't my fault. I didn't cause what happened to him. He should have just left me alone. Now I'm the one who must suffer his company, maybe for the rest of my life. The day had started with a hard slap of rocks against my window, and I loosed a loud sigh as I thrust the covers away from me. Every morning. Every goddamn morning. I hadn't had to buy an alarm clock since I moved in, so I suppose that was something. As another handful of stones cascaded against the window, I swung angrily out of bed and shifted the curtains open. I did not open the window right away. You only made that mistake once. The pudgy man-child on the sidewalk had just reared back to throw another handful when he saw the window open and smiled happily. That smile showed me every inch of his yellow teeth, his spotted gums, and the spit that covered his half-rotten teeth in a sheen of translucence. He was dressed in his usual attire, and I imagined I could smell him from 2 floors up. He wore ratty Chuck Taylor sneakers, cargo shorts in February that likely hadn't been washed since his mother had bought them from JCPenney, a ratty black trench coat that covered his grease-stained t-shirt depicting a busty anime girl who seemed overjoyed to be stretched across his voluptuous C-cup breasts, and a wispy beard that made his face look dirtier somehow, and the battered black fedora that capped it all off. This is what he had worn, or some iteration of it, every day since we had first met 2 years ago, and I shook my head as he waved a pudgy hand at me. "Good morning, m'lady." He knew my name. I'd told it to him 1,000 times, but he always insisted on calling me m'lady.
Kenneth, what the hell do you want?
I was grumpy about being woken up, and sour about Kenneth being the first person I saw 9 mornings out of 10. "Well, I just thought that since we work today, I'd offer to walk you. We're on the same shift again, so just seems like you might appreciate the company." I sighed. I would have appreciated the company. Any company but Kenneth's.
I'm gonna be a minute, Kenneth. A long minute, so feel free to just go on without me.
I can wait for you. I'll be right here when you get done. When you're ready. Unless you'd rather I wait inside. He snorted through a partially clogged nose. I saw the gleam that came into his piggy eyes and shuddered.
I'd rather you went on without me, Kenneth, but since there's nothing I can do to stop you from waiting, I suppose you can just wait on the front porch.
I closed the window then, blocking him out and pulling the curtains closed, as I went to get ready for work. Every day. Every goddamn day. I've been living in this townhouse for the last 2 years, and I should have known that the rent was too good to be true. The lady who showed me the house was very complimentary about the neighborhood. She talked about the convenient garbage pickup, the cost-effective water measures she had installed, the proximity to restaurants in downtown, and all at a cost that was nearly half of the other rentals in the area. I had been attending college at the time, the college being about 3 blocks from my apartment, and it had sounded like a real sweetheart deal. I was moving my stuff the first time I met Kenneth. I say met, but I smelled him before I saw him. Have you ever been next to someone on the subway who maybe doesn't shower regularly? The kind of person who covers it up with body sprays instead of just washing their clothes and wearing deodorant. The kind of person you don't really want to stand too close to because their clothes look like they might get grease on yours if they brush up against you. That was what I was assaulted by as this mountain of a man came wandering over to introduce himself. He was dressed in cargo shorts and a t-shirt that day, the July heat too much for even his trench coat to handle, with a pair of sandals that put his yellow toenails on display. I was carrying a box of books inside when I heard him greet me by name. That should have been my first indication that something was afoot. "Hey, welcome to the neighborhood. I'm Kenneth. My mom said I had a new tenant, but she failed to mention how beautiful she was. Would you like some help?" I had thanked him, but Kenneth's idea of helping seemed to entail watching me move boxes while he talked my ear off about video games, anime, and fantasy roleplay. He was aghast that a girl as worldly as me, whatever that was supposed to mean, had never seen an anime. I admitted that I had watched some Sailor Moon when I was in elementary school, mostly because it was on when I got home. He scoffed at that, though, and waved a pudgy hand at the mention of what he called girly anime. The fact that I didn't play D&D or video games was also a subject he wished to remedy. Thankfully, I had moved all my stuff in by the time he started talking about the third or fourth game franchise, of which he was a super fan, and I thanked him for his help.
I'm going inside to unpack now, so I'll see you.
Ooh, I can help you unpack if you like. I'd been standing in the doorway when he said it, the front door the only thing that lay between him and I. The look that crossed his face when he offered to help me unpack was akin to a cat left to guard a mouse. I could just picture his grubby man-child fingers pawing through my clothes, finding some reason to stumble across my underwear, pressing my shirts to his pug nose, and had to stifle a full-body shudder.
On second thought, I'm pretty tired, Kenneth. I think I'm going to rest and unpack tomorrow. Have a good night.
He started to protest, but I closed the door on him and locked the deadbolt. The door had 3 locks, a twist lock, the deadbolt, and the top chain. I engaged all of them before turning around to make something to eat. I had already decided that I would unpack before going to bed today, leaving Kenneth with no excuse to go upstairs and touch any of my things. His annoyance had become creepy pretty quick, and I did not want him hanging around any more than I could help. I had just gotten to the entryway to the small kitchen when I heard an unsettling noise from the front door. I turned and found the doorknob twisting a little, as whoever was on the other side tried to quietly open my door. I thought about seeing who it was, but my fear had a firm grip on me. Home is where you're supposed to feel safest, and that turning knob negated any safeness I might have felt. I couldn't prove it was Kenneth, but I couldn't prove it wasn't. The turning stopped after a few seconds, and I made a mental note to get a chain for the back door, too. The first 6 months were probably the least eventful. I enjoyed my newfound freedom of having my own space, but I definitely noticed some of the strangeness in the house. I would come home to find things moved or find things missing, and I suspected that Kenneth had been in while I was gone. More than once I would catch a whiff of Axe body spray upstairs, a smudge on something that looked like a fingerprint, or just something moved that shouldn't have been. Kenneth came over to hang out a lot, and I quickly got tired of having him around. He was always overly friendly, almost fawningly so, and I began to suspect that he had a crush on me. He brought over anime or his Xbox, and I have spent many evenings reading subtitles or watching him finish some level on a game. He was annoying, but I felt that he was ultimately pretty harmless, and the movies he brought over were sometimes pretty cool. He seemed harmless, if not a little clingy. Anytime I would start to feel the least bit comfortable around him, though, I remembered that look on the doorstep and began to rethink. I gave his mother a key the first time I changed the locks, telling her I suspected an old tenant was using the key to come and go as they pleased. After I found the chain off the back door, something I was zealous about keeping chained at all times, I didn't bother giving her a key. After that, the intrusions stopped. Then, COVID had happened. The city did the lockdown thing, and suddenly all the classes were online, all the functions were canceled, and I was spending more time than usual inside my apartment. During this time, unfortunately, my grades began to suffer. Some people can absolutely take classes online and do fine, but I'm not one of those people. I was one of those popular girls in high school who liked to bask in a place's environment and social structure. Suddenly, having professors that I couldn't talk to face-to-face was hurting my grades. Suddenly, not having peers to talk to review notes with, and to bounce ideas off of was hurting me. And as my grades suffered, the school threatened to take away my grant. The grant was how I paid for housing, so I doubled down and tried to bring them up again. I studied long hours, watched tutorials on YouTube, and read anything that I could find on the subject matter, but nothing seemed to help. Kenneth also did not help with this particular problem. Despite the order to wear masks and social distance, Kenneth was always trying to come over and hang out like he used to. He wasn't in school, all his friends were already online, and neither he or his mother thought this was more than the flu. I don't know how many times I would look through the peephole and find him maskless on my front porch with an anime box set of something or his Xbox waiting for me to hang out. I tried to be nice to him, but as my grades suffered, so did my mental health, and I started ignoring him after a while. Then, after a horrible semester, my grant was cut, and I was left waiting to re-up next year. That's how we'd come to our current predicament, me working and Kenneth being paid to hang out with me. I came out the front door 45 minutes later to find him sitting on my porch swing, his phone in his hand, and his rocking making the chains grind together annoyingly.
Is that really what you're wearing to work?
It's not like they care. It's Walmart. As long as you show up, they don't care what you have on. He had a point, but I still tried to tune him out as we walked to work together. I had started working at Walmart after my savings started to dwindle. My landlord, Kenneth's mother, cut my rent a little, because of all this pandemic nonsense, she said, with a little scoff. However, it still only floated me another month or so before I needed to get a job. Walmart was hiring, and they needed warm bodies. Kenneth didn't work there right away, but after hearing that I had started working there, he was soon applying for a job as well. Charles, one of my assistant managers, was a gaming buddy of his, and I assumed the source of my constant stock shifts with Kenneth. It was a real toss-up, which one of them I hated more these days. Kenneth was unnaturally quiet on the way to work today. His face had that look that let me know he was thinking about something very hard, and I feared that he would ask me out again. He had asked me out about once a month since I moved in, and I had just started ignoring him, despite his mother's pressure. I got the feeling that she was getting worried about him not leaving the nest, and she hoped that a nice girlfriend would be enough of a mother stand-in to help him get out of her basement and into mine. Sorry, Mama Kenneth, but that dog wasn't hunting in these woods. She could find some other girl to pawn her precious angel off onto. So, m'lady, he said, finally finding his courage, you may have noticed that, Valentine's Day is tomorrow. I rolled my eyes at him theatrically.
It has somehow escaped me after unloading a metric ton of Valentine's Day candy and toys over the past month, Kenneth. But thanks for bringing it to my attention.
Well, I was just wondering if you'd like to be my Valentine this year and go on a date with me tomorrow. I sighed. Every year with this guy.
No, Kenneth. For the 1000th time, no.
Kenneth's face got that look about it that small children get when you tell them no. But why? Don't tell me you already have a date.
Nope, sure don't. I intend to stay in on Valentine's Day since I have the night off.
Well, that's fine. We don't have to go out or anything. We can stay in and rent a movie and maybe cuddle on the couch. And I rounded on him then, my frustration and lack of patience getting the better of me, as I erupted liquid hate all over this yipping puppy of a man.
No, Kenneth, I have told you no 1,000 times, and the answer will always be no. I don't want to date you. I hardly want to be your friend most days. And the thought of you sitting next to me on the couch gives me hives. Move on!
Kenneth just stood there, his face transitioning between barely contained tears and barely contained rage. His mouth seemed like it wanted to say something, but his brain seemed to be holding it at bay. He looked like he was trying to chew himself from the inside out, and the tears seemed to win out in the end. His eyes began to flood with impotent water, the flood falling to his t-shirt as he turned and ran back towards home. He looked like one of those anime characters he loved so much as he fled from his spurning, and I guessed later that might have been his intention. I let him go, making sure he rounded the corner before turning to head to work. Some of us still had bills to pay. I thought that maybe Kenneth would have learned a little something after my outburst, but he clearly hadn't. I got home very late that night to find him sitting on my porch with a heart-shaped box of chocolates. "M'lady," he wheezed, rising ponderously from the seat, "you've returned to home at long last." The look on my face should have told him everything he needed to know about how glad I was to see him. I brushed snow off the shoulder of my jacket and wondered how long he'd been sitting there waiting for me. It had been chilly when I'd gotten to work, but not really uncomfortably so. That had changed quickly over the last 8 hours, and all anyone at work could talk about was the freezing blizzard that was rolling in tonight. The old-timers were saying that the Weather Channel called for 3 feet of snow overnight, and it had already started to powder as I'd left at 10. I had walked back home with only the streetlights to keep me company, a welcome change from the usual yarking in my ear of Kenneth. Now, it seemed, I would have to get loud with him all over again.
Yeah, you know why I had to stay so late? It was you. You didn't show up for work, so I had to do your job and my job tonight. I had to stock 2 departments in 8 hours, and then when I couldn't get it done, I had to stay an extra 4 hours and finish your work.
He backed away, holding up the box of chocolates like it was a shield, clearly not receiving the greeting he had hoped for. Yeah, I kinda had a little freak out when you said you wouldn't be my girlfriend, but I realized that once you had the chance to calm down, you'd come to your senses. And we could plan our date for tomorrow. Here, I got you these chocolates. It's kinda late to make a reservation for anywhere, but, He stopped talking when I slapped the box out of his hand, the half-eaten box scattering across my porch.
No, Kenneth, I will not date you. I will not walk with you to work. I'm through pretending to be your friend. Go away and leave me alone. Take a hint, you insufferable man-child. I don't like you, and I don't want to hang out with you.
I walked to the door and keyed it open, blocking it so he couldn't just follow me in. When I turned back to look at him, though, I was a little worried about doing this on the porch. Kenneth was breathing heavily, and I thought for a moment that he might be crying. The breathing was filled with rage, though, and I was suddenly very aware that I was a 5'2" woman yelling at a man who was nearly 6 feet tall and weighed about twice my weight. I suddenly needed to get in the house in a very short amount of time. I needed the door between Kenneth and I. I needed to call his mother, if not the police, and explain to her that her son was on the verge of a restraining order. What the hell is your problem? Kenneth bellowed, and I half closed the door as he turned to let his spittle of rage fly at me. I'm nice to you. I try to be your friend. I bring you gifts. I do everything that a boyfriend does, and you still won't date me. That's not fair. You're supposed to love me. You're supposed to fall in love with me because I do all the things that girls like. I even went and bought the box set of Sailor Moon so we could just sit and watch it together, since I know you like that girly crap. He took a step towards me, and I slammed the door in his face. I had just engaged the deadbolt when he twisted the knob and slammed his full weight against the door, bellowing like a wounded animal.
Go home, Kenneth. Don't bother me anymore, or I will call the police.
He banged on the door a while longer, but I ignored him. When I had finished making myself a bowl of chili, I found that he had stopped pounding on the door. I ate my food, showered, got my clothes ready for tomorrow. On the off chance that we didn't get 3 feet of snow, I would need to go to work tomorrow and deal with Kenneth. He would likely be waiting for me as always, smiling his butter-toothed grin and waiting like an excited puppy for me to come out and play. I was snug in my bed, preparing to sleep, when I heard the music. The music was soft, romantic, and I thought for a moment that it might be something by John Legend. I could hear it coming from right below my window, and I flipped the covers back angrily as I went to have a look. Sure enough, it was Kenneth. He was parked in the snow, a large silver boombox in his hand, and as he lifted it up, bad 80s movie style, I opened the window. We made eye contact, his eyes filled with earnest emotion, and mine filled with nothing but puppy-kicking rage. I opened the window, chill scraping across me.
Go home, Kenneth.
No, Kenneth said. Not until you agree to date me.
You're going to freeze out there.
Then let me in and keep me warm, he said, unable to keep that grin off his face. I just closed the window on him. He'd get cold and go home eventually. The music stopped about an hour later, and I guessed that his batteries had run dry after all that continuous playing. The next morning, I woke up to a sea of white. The snow hadn't been 3 feet deep. The snow had been 5 feet deep, and it spilled over onto my porch when I opened my door that morning. The wind was made of frozen razor blades, the power holding but flickering a little now and then, and I called work to see if I had to be there today. They said that they would be closed for the next few days. They told me to stay safe, and I decided to settle in for a well-deserved couple of days off. I had expected Kenneth to bother me since I was now trapped in my house, but he never came around. I got to enjoy a nice breakfast, and even got to watch some TV before I was reminded that Kenneth existed at all. The knock came as the laugh track played on my 3rd episode of Friends, and I sighed as I tied my bathrobe so as not to give him any ideas. He would want to come in, pretending like we'd never had a fight yesterday at all, and I would likely have to yell at him again. I was surprised to see that it was Kenneth's mom, Janet, and not her portly man-child when I opened the door. "Hey there, she said, shivering on my porch as she pulled the scarf around her mouth. "I was just wondering if Kenneth was over here." Janet is, quite frankly, the sweetest woman I've ever met. In the 2 years I've been here, she's tirelessly fixed anything that's wrong in the townhouse, brought over food for things like 4th of July or Thanksgiving, and even apologized for Kenneth on more than one occasion. She's like Cartman's mom from South Park. She was a lovely woman, and while aware that her son was a nightmare, there was only so much she could do besides love him.
Not since last night, ma'am.
"Oh dear. Well, I do hope he's okay. He said you two had a little fight yesterday, and he was coming over to try to make up." I gritted my teeth hard enough to hear them creak, but I held in the rage I was feeling so I didn't cook this nice, oblivious lady alive. "Well, if you see him, tell him I was worried, okay?" As she left, I saw that someone had shoveled the sidewalk, and she had made a little path to my door. That was nice of them, but it seemed I really didn't have anywhere to go. The city was buried under snow and basically shut down. It appeared I could be inside for a while, and I decided to settle in and enjoy my time off. The weirdness didn't start till almost sundown. I was making dinner when I noticed a smell hanging around the apartment. I looked around, wondering if I'd forgotten to take the trash out or something. It was a wet smell, with an underlying odor of cologne. It was like someone had tried to cover a mess with deodorizer, and the longer I stood cooking at the stove, the more my head began to ache. The longer I stayed in the miasma, the worse the smell got, and the stir-fry I was making started to swim a little as I cooked it. I ended up eating it a little underdone as I fled the kitchen to the living room. As the swinging door opened, I stopped and basted in the swampy tang of smells from the living room and the kitchen. In the kitchen, it had smelled like funk. In the living room, it smelled like the inverse. Someone had been in my house. Of that I had no doubt. The smell of spray cologne was strong in here, like a pungent wall that surrounded the couch. And as I sat, I could feel something flaking beneath me. It was like sitting in a seat behind a small child, and as I looked, I could see chip crumbs sticking to my pajama pants. They were orange and smelled strongly of Doritos. I set my bowl down as I stood and walked through the house. I could see smudges around the room, especially on my figurines and some of my pictures. Someone with large, greasy fingers had been touching my things, and when I moved past the end of the table near the door, I took up the keychain with the mace on it. The doors were deadbolted, and though I didn't know how Kenneth had gotten in my house, I was certain that he was the source of this. If he thought he could hang out in my house and violate my privacy just to get his rocks off, he had another thing coming. My food was cold by the time I got done, triple-checking every room in my apartment just to be sure. There was nowhere he could have stayed hidden from me, not someone his size, and after spraying some Febreze around, I took my food up to my room and just ate it cold. I felt uncomfortable in the open down there, and as the snow blew and the wind howled, I sat on my bed and listened. At some point, I fell asleep, curling up in my bed as I listened to the silent house around me. When I came to, the lights were off in my room, and the curtains were thrown open to reveal a crystalline moon peeking in. The room was as quiet as the house, but I was aware of a heavy, wet sound as I came awake. It sounded like a dog, one that's been left out in the heat, and I scanned around to find the source of that heavy breathing. My eyes cast around, looking for the noise, and finally settled on a large black spot in the corner of the room. The darkness there was deep, the pitted murk blighted by a pair of small ovals that seemed to reflect the moon. The breathing was coming from there, and as it got heavier, the darkness seemed to shift unnervingly, like someone lurking in the gloom, trying not to be noticed. "M'lady," someone almost whispered, and I was up and across the room in a matter of seconds. I snapped the lights on, hands reaching for anything I could find to defend myself with. I expected to see him much too close as the lights came on. I expected him to bury me under his weight, pushing me down and feeling his hands as he tried to kiss me, to touch me. I gripped the ceramic vase as the lights came on, preparing to swing it and shatter it against his head as he... There was nothing. The lights came on and revealed nothing but an empty room with an anxious girl looking crazily around for an attacker who wasn't there. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat up and argued with myself until the sun came up. I knew what I had seen. I had seen Kenneth in the corner, heard the same deep, watery breathing I had heard 1,000 times. But I couldn't have seen him. Kenneth was a large and stocky fellow. There was no way he could have gotten away in the split second between the lights being off and the lights being on. This wasn't someone who could squeeze under my bed in a split second or slip into my closet without notice. Kenneth often got winded on walks to work, and the idea that he could quickly get out of my sight was laughable at best. Still, he had been there. That whole next day, I saw signs of someone having been in my house. It started as I finally got up for the day. As I came downstairs, I smelled something getting ready to burn in the kitchen. I pulled my robe around myself and quickly pushed into the cloud of smoke that awaited me. On the stove, smoke billowing up, was one of my good pans. I turned the stove off, jerking my hand away as I grabbed the handle of the pan. It was broiling. The burner turned all the way up, and I grabbed an oven mitt and took the pan off the stove. It wasn't until I put it in the sink that I saw a single blackened pancake at the bottom. A heart-shaped pancake. I was scraping the grit from the bottom of the pan when I suddenly heard an all-too-familiar theme song from the living room. The TV had been off when I got up. The lights dimmed to a soft glow. From under the swinging door, I could hear the TV blaring, and the pulse of bright lights clicked up to the max. I pushed in, expecting to find Kenneth parked on my couch, waiting for me with his big serial killer grin and his excuse of how, "Oh, well, the door was open, so he'd come right on in." But there was no one in the living room when I came through the door. There was, however, an indent in my couch, roughly the size of a large someone's backside. I searched the apartment again, already knowing what I would find, but needing the reassurance that I would find it. There was no one, just me, in my apartment. I turned off the TV and cleaned up the mess, waiting till 9 before calling my landlord, wanting to hear her tell me that Kenneth had come home. I wanted her to answer the phone and hear Kenneth in the background as he loudly whined for food or money or something. I wanted the confirmation that he was home, but I also feared it, because if he was home, then what the hell was going on around here? She answered on the 4th ring. "Hello? Hello? Did you find him? Please say you found my baby." I sighed, my hopes shattered.
No, ma'am. I was just calling to see if he had turned up.
I could hear her sob before telling me that no one had seen him and how worried she was about him, and to please call if I heard anything. I got dressed and decided to sit on the porch for a while, the house suddenly feeling too small for me. I thought I heard some rustling as I slid out of my pajamas and into some real clothes, but I did my best to ignore it as I made some tea and stepped out into the frigid air. The smoke from my tea plumed up as I sat on the swing that Kenneth had occupied yesterday, letting the cold air clear my head as I tried to read the book I had brought with me. The longer I sat, my eyes roving over the winter wonderland in my own yard, the harder it became to maintain my anxiety. I was making too much out of this. Surely I had been imagining things, or a power surge caused by the weather had turned my TV on, or I'd been sleepwalking or something. The more I let the cold wash over me, the more I assured myself that I was just being silly. As noon came and went, the cold beginning to abate and the snow starting to soften, I went back inside. My stomach was growling for some lunch, but the icy chill from outside made me long for a shower first. I had all but forgotten about my trepidation and anxiety, and simply wanted to be warm and snuggly as I enjoyed the rest of my afternoon. I would have a shower, put on some nice pajamas, make the stew I had set the ingredients out for in the fridge, and then head to bed after a nice evening spent at rest. As the warm water cascaded over my skin, I felt the cold dissipate and the leftover anxiety melting away. The shower had always been my safe place, my relaxation zone, and standing beneath the warm deluge made me feel a sense of peace that I'd been missing before the communion with nature. I washed my hair, lathering myself up, and just stood under the water as the soap and my worries slid down the drain. At least, I did, before I felt someone touch my hair. I have long blonde hair, the kind that falls to about the small of my back and must be meticulously maintained so it doesn't look trashy. If I'm sitting on the couch watching TV, there's probably a brush in my hand, and my hair is flipped over my shoulder. I've always been sensitive about my hair, and I don't let people touch it very often. So when someone ran their fingers through my long blonde mass of wet hair, my eyes snapped open, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. I had felt the slight tug as 2 or 3 thick fingers slid down and parted the wet locks. I slipped as I stumbled forward, catching myself on the wall before I fell and hurt myself. Through the soupy curtain of foam, I looked around for the source of the touch, expecting to see him. I expected to see a bulbous shape leering at me from behind the curtain, but as I swiped the tangled muck out of my eyes, I was greeted with an empty bathroom. I came shakily out of the shower, hands trembling as I reached for my towel. I was shaken badly. I knew what I had felt. Enough men had tried to touch my hair for me to know what it felt like, and I couldn't trick myself into believing I'd just been imagining things. As I slid back into my clothes, the fog still thick around me, I was met with something even less easy to overlook. Written in the steam on the mirror, the lines reflecting my own horrified face back at me, was the word, "M'lady." I ran, half dressed from the bathroom, and slipped on the surprise waiting for me in the hall. I went down hard on my backside, bruising my tailbone. The floor was covered with something that my wet feet found slippery, and now that I was on eye level with the floor, I could see them. They had been scattered artfully, leading towards my door in a line of red blotches. The rose petals would have been romantic on any other occasion. At the moment, they left me breathless as I leaned against the wall, watching the door creak slowly open. Behind it, the light in my room dimmed. I could see a thick, softly shadowed form, his eyes gleaming as his tongue slid over his thick porcine lips. I vaguely remember tripping down half the stairs, bruising my legs as I ran for the door. I remember grabbing my phone from the end table by the door, the charging cord coming free as I ran for the porch. I remember talking to the operator, my teeth chattering as I shivered on the porch. My hands and feet were numb, my hair getting stiff from the cold, when the lights lit the icy yard. The sun had started to melt the snow, even as it set behind the nearby houses. The lights on the snow looked odd, almost ethereal, and as they approached, I was thankful when someone threw a blanket over me. One of the officers stayed to take my statement, as the others searched the house. As I told him what had happened, I heard the snow crunch as my landlady came over to see what all the fuss was about. The police came from inside a moment later, shaking their heads and telling me they hadn't found anything. Someone was definitely in there, though. There were rose petals all over your bed and a box of chocolates sitting in the center. Someone had planned quite a romantic surprise for you, though I'm guessing the feeling wasn't mutual. I shook my head and started to tell them about Kenneth's ambush on my porch the night before, but that was when I saw him again. The snow had melted some, and I could see him hunched by the fence line. He was staying still, trying not to be noticed, but I had seen him. His ridiculous black trench coat was a dead giveaway, and I screamed as I pointed at him. His mother looked over my shoulder, pushing me aside as she ran towards her son. I grabbed the rail as I watched her go, the cops chasing after her, wondering why he hadn't moved. The jig was up. We could see him. Why was he just sitting there? When his mother started screaming, and the police officer started calling for an ambulance, I knew something was wrong. That was 2 days ago. He was dead, of course. He had frozen to death, waiting for me to invite him inside. They found the boombox sitting around his feet, frozen to the ground. His coat had been frozen to the back of the fence, and he had simply gone to sleep and never woken up. His mother, of course, was quick to blame me. Why hadn't I let him inside? Why hadn't I called her? And on until the police had finally taken her away. I had taken a few things and gone to stay at a hotel for the night. I just couldn't stay in that house, knowing that there was a dead body in my yard. I thought, at the time, that that would be the end of it. They would take his body, and the weirdness would end. Even if his spirit was somehow attached to my apartment, I would just move. His mother wouldn't want me living there anymore anyway, not after I had led to the death of her precious angel. I would just take my things and go elsewhere. When I woke up this morning to find the words "M'lady" written on the bathroom mirror, I knew then that this wasn't attached to my apartment. The haunting had nothing to do with my place at all. He's attached himself to me. Lying here, writing this, I can already hear his raspy, phlegm-filled breath from the corner of the room. It appears that unlike in life, I may be his M'lady after all, unwilling or not. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Happy early Valentine's Day, and I hope you enjoyed this Valentine's Day story. If you enjoyed the voice talent of a certain someone on this episode, you'll be delighted to know that's my wife. I asked her to do a quick voice work for me, and she agreed, so maybe you'll hear some more of her on the show. I hope you enjoyed her work, and I'll be sure to tell her if you did. Though I probably won't tell her if you didn't. Let's go ahead and thank our sponsors before we sign off. Thanks to Leslie Lou Riddle for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributor, and thanks to Glenn Jenkins for being our Ghost Rider tier contributor. Thanks, you guys. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you too would like to support the show, come on down to Patreon. For just $5 a month, you can join Leslie Lou Riddle and be part of our Spooky Skeleton army, and have your name read out at the end of every video and every TikTok that I do. You also get to suggest a story for my Monday stories, so come on down early and get your stories read. If you'd like to buy a book, they're available on Amazon. I have a link below. And as always, I look forward to seeing you all again next week. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening and a spooky Valentine's Day.